Hi, I'm Jamie.
And I'm Amber. I really enjoy designing garment patterns.
We're going to show you some tips and tricks to be more successful when sewing our patterns.
To finish your sleeve, you will attach the cuff to the bottom. You will have pressed your cuff in half, right sides together, and then pressed the side that's not interfaced in at 5/8 of an inch, the width of your seam allowance. On the cuff, there will be a few marks. There's a line mark here that's 5/8 an inch from the edge, and one here that's just shy of 2 inches from the edge. And there's a front mark and a back mark, and that's going to help you make sure that you're attaching your cuff to the correct sleeve. I've put my gathering stitches in here, and here's this single triangle, which is my front mark, and this is the cuff that's going to match this sleeve, because right sides together, that mark will attach that sleeve correctly. And you want to gather so that all of your marks match up to your cuff, and that these line marks match up with the edge of your placket. So I need to add some more gathers to this to make that mark and the edge of that placket line up with the mark on the line mark here. To add gathers, you just pull on those strings. And I'm going to go ahead and start pinning and matching the marks. So I'm going to line this up with the edge of the placket and pin it. And then I'll find the single triangle, match it, and pin it there. My double triangle, which is the back side of my sleeve and my sleeve cuff. And then the other side of the placket is going to match up with this line. So I want to adjust the gathering until it all fits nicely, and then I'll add a few more pins before I stitch it together. You also want to try and make sure your gathers are even all the way around the sleeve. And once you get it on there, you'll take it to the machine and sew it. I've sewn the seam connecting the cuff to the sleeve, and then I also went to my iron and I pressed the seam allowance towards the cuff, including this excess bit of the cuff on both edges of the sleeve. I've turned those up and pressed them. Now I'm going to fold the cuff back on itself along that line that I creased before, and sew both ends of the cuff at 5/8 of an inch. So I'll sew right up here, making sure not to catch the edge of the sleeve, and I will also sew 5/8 of an inch over here, which is going to leave me with my little button overlap. So I'll take it back to the machine and sew that. Now that I've sewn those ends, I can flip my cuff right side out, but first I'm going to trim away some of this seam allowance here. And that way those corners won't be quite as bulky. Now I'll take it to the iron and press it right side out, and make sure to poke out those corners of the cuff to make it nice and 90-degree point there. I've flipped my cuff right side out and poked the corners out and pressed it. And as I was pressing it, I made sure that this inside fold, which is not sewn down yet, was covering the previous seam. So that way, right now we're going to stitch around and secure that from the front. And we want to make sure that our stitches catch it. So you just want to make sure it's going past this seam line just a little bit, at least up to the seam line and maybe a little bit past it. And then that way, when we sew just inside this seam line, we're going to catch that edge that's not stitched down. So I'm going to go ahead and start stitching really close to the edge and just go entirely around the cuff. At the corner, I'm going to leave my needle down and pivot. Make sure that you don't catch any part of your sleeve as you're going around the cuff. And this is where I'll start catching that loose edge underneath. I'm going to go over the beginning part of my stitching just a little bit to finish that seam. And that should have caught the inside of your cuff. So now your sleeve cuff is complete. Got some threads to trim and some basting stitches to take out, but it looks pretty good.